There is a specific kind of silence that fills a house after the love of your life leaves it forever. A silence so heavy it feels like it has mass, like it exerts gravity on your chest. And for 2 years, that silence was the only thing greeting me when I woke up in Aspen Ridge, Colorado. My name is Arthur Vance, and for 40 years I calculated the stress loads on aircraft wings for Lockheed Martin, obsessing over safety margins and structural integrity. But nothing in my engineering manuals could have prepared me for the structural failure of my own heart when Eleanor died. We moved to this corner lot in Pineview Estates to grow old, to watch the mountain sunsets paint the Rockies in shades of purple and gold, and to build her masterpiece, a memorial garden filled with Yorkshire white roses that her grandmother had smuggled out of England during the Blitz, genetically irreplaceable, historically priceless, and emotionally worth more than every asset I owned combined. But paradise, as I learned, is fragile, and it didn't end with a bang. It ended with the sound of a V8 engine revving at exactly 7:47 a.m. on a Tuesday. You have to understand the layout to understand the violation, because my property sits on a corner, a sharp turn that requires slowing down to 15 miles per hour if you are a civilized human being. But Karen Sterling was neither civilized nor human. She was a force of entropy wrapped in a blazer that cost more than my first car. She was the vice president of the Pineview Community Association, a woman with a blonde helmet of hair that didn't move in the wind, and a white Range Rover with a vanity plate that read QUNB, and she had discovered that cutting across the soft, manicured grass of my lawn saved her exactly 90 seconds on her morning commute. The first time she did it, I was standing on the porch with my coffee, watching in frozen horror as 3 tons of British-engineered steel tore through the sprinkler lines and crushed the budding heads of Eleanor's roses, leaving tire ruts deep enough to bury a small animal. And when I ran out screaming, waving my arms like a desperate air traffic controller trying to avert a crash, she didn't apologize. She didn't look shocked. She just rolled down that tinted window, flashed a smile that was all teeth and no warmth, and said, "It's an easement. Honey, look it up," before speeding off to make someone else's life miserable. I tried the civilized route first, because that's what Eleanor would have wanted. She was a librarian, a woman of words and peace who believed that every conflict could be solved with a cup of tea and a conversation. So I went to the police. I went to the HOA meetings. I wrote letters. I hired a lawyer who took a retainer and gave me a shrug, telling me that Karen was married to Richard Sterling, the developer who built half this town and happened to be the association's legal counsel. The system wasn't broken. It was working exactly as it was designed, protecting the predators at the top while the rest of us were just roadkill. And for 47 mornings, I watched her do it. 47 days of fresh ruts, of mud splattered on the granite bench where Eleanor used to sit and read poetry. 47 days of my grief being run over by a luxury SUV. It changes you, watching someone desecrate a grave, because that's what that garden was. It wasn't just dirt and plants. It was a living timeline of our marriage, the hydrangeas we planted on our 10th anniversary, the Japanese maple that marked her remission, the Yorkshire roses that were her legacy, and Karen Sterling was treating it like a shortcut to a Starbucks. I remember waking up on the 48th morning, the sun hitting the peaks of the mountains, the air crisp and smelling of pine, and realizing that the sadness had evaporated, replaced by a cold, hard knot of engineering malice, the kind of focused clarity you get when you realize the aircraft is going down and you are the only one who can land it. I decided to start with passive resistance, employing basic physics to deter a moving object. So I spent a weekend hauling decorative river boulders, smooth granite spheres the size of watermelons, placing them along the perimeter of the lawn in a geometric sequence that looked aesthetic but served as a tank trap for suburban assault vehicles. I measured the gaps with my old calipers, ensuring no car could pass without encountering resistance. And I thought, surely, she isn't insane. Surely she won't damage her own vehicle just to prove a point. I was wrong. The next morning, the sound wasn't the usual whoosh of tires on grass. It was a sickening, grinding crunch, the sound of metal meeting stone, and I looked out the window to see Karen not stopping, not reversing, but accelerating, her Range Rover climbing over the boulders, her undercarriage sparking, grinding the granite into dust, forcing her way through with the sheer mechanical violence of a woman who has never been told no in her entire life. She didn't just drive over them. She crushed them, and then, in a move of pure spite, She swerved deeper into the property, her tires chewing up the last of the Yorkshire roses, spinning out in the mud to ensure maximum destruction, leaving behind a mangled bumper piece and a destroyed legacy. I walked out into the ruin of the garden, the smell of exhaust fumes hanging in the air like poison, and I knelt beside the crushed stem of the rosebush Eleanor had watered every day until she was too weak to lift the can, and I felt something snap, not like a twig, but like a high-tension cable parting under load, a dangerous, whipping release of energy. I went inside and bought an 8-camera security system with 4K resolution and night vision, positioning them with the overlapping fields of fire I'd learned about from military defense contracts, turning my home into a fortress of surveillance. But Karen was faster, or maybe just more evil, because 2 days later, she was at my door, not with an apology, but with a clipboard and a sneer, slapping a violation notice on my chest. "Obstruction of emergency access," she said, her voice dripping with faux concern, citing some obscure bylaw about fire truck turnarounds, claiming my cameras were an eyesore that violated the aesthetic harmony of Pineview Estates, and handing me a bill for $5,000 in accumulated fines, $200 for every day that unsightly barriers had existed. She told me the cameras had to come down immediately or she'd have the HOA board, which was just her husband Richard, and her bridge partner Susan, put a lien on my house. "You're a sad little man," she told me, standing on the welcome mat Eleanor had picked out. "Why don't you just sell? Richard's company is looking to rezone this corner for commercial use anyway. We could put a nice parking lot here, make it useful." A parking lot. She wanted to pave over Eleanor. I took the fine, I took the insults, and I closed the door, sliding the deadbolt home with a click that sounded like the cocking of a weapon. I didn't go to sleep that night. Instead, I went to the basement, I dug out my old drafting table, I blew the dust off my physics textbooks, and I started to think less like a grieving husband and more like the man who designed the hydraulic landing gear for heavy bombers. The escalation wasn't linear, it was exponential, a vertical climb into madness that Karen Sterling seemed to be piloting with glee, unaware that she was flying straight into a storm of legally sanctioned retribution. She thought she had won because the cameras came down, or at least, the visible ones did, but she didn't know I had replaced them with microlenses hidden in the birdhouses, wired directly to a cloud server that backed up to 3 different continents. I needed evidence, I needed a dossier, but more than that, I needed a weapon that couldn't be filed under firearm or explosive, something that existed in a legal gray area so profound it would make a lawyer weep. I spent 3 weeks in the Pineview Public Library and the county clerk's office, swimming through a sea of bureaucracy, reading the original covenants of the neighborhood from 1985, and that's when I found the first crack in her armor. The amendments Richard Sterling had filed, the ones banning non-standard landscaping and surveillance devices, were signed only by him and Karen, but Colorado state law requires a supermajority vote of 67% of the homeowners to change bylaws, a vote that had never happened. Every fine she had levied, every threat she had made, was built on a foundation of fraud, a paper tiger constructed by a husband and wife team who treated the neighborhood like their personal fiefdom. But knowing the law isn't enough. You have to enforce it. And the police, specifically Deputy Miller, a good man with tired eyes who had responded to my calls 3 times, told me straight up, "Mr. Vance, I know she's trespassing, I know she's damaging property, but without proof of malicious intent, it's a civil matter, and her husband plays golf with the district attorney." However, Deputy Miller left me with a breadcrumb, a whisper as he walked back to his cruiser. Check Statute 18-1-704.5. The Make My Day law. It covers more than just your living room. It covers your curtilage, your land, if you can prove a threat. A threat. A vehicle is a weapon. A 6,000-pound SUV moving at 30 miles per hour possesses enough kinetic energy to kill, and if that vehicle is repeatedly targeting your property, you have the right to use reasonable force to stop it. Then came the morning that broke the world. I was in the garage, tinkering with a prototype latch mechanism, when the ground shook, literally shook, and I ran out to see a yellow bulldozer, branded with Sterling Heritage Group, tearing into the earth of the Memorial Garden. Karen was there, standing by her Range Rover, directing the operator like a conductor, pointing at the 50-year-old spruce tree that shaded the granite bench. "Fire hazard," She shouted over the diesel roar when she saw me. Emergency remediation. The HOA has the right to remove dangerous vegetation. I screamed. I ran toward them. But I was 70 years old and slow, and I watched, helpless, as the steel blade of the dozer slammed into the granite memorial stone, the one I had hand-carved with Eleanor's name. It cracked down the middle with a sound like a gunshot, splitting her name in two, and then the blade caught the roots of the tree, ripping it from the soil, destroying 20 years of growth in 20 seconds. They left the debris there, a pile of splintered wood and broken stone, a monument to their cruelty. I sat in the dirt, holding the two halves of the stone, weeping until I couldn't breathe, until the grief was replaced by a cold, white-hot fury that felt like liquid nitrogen in my veins. This wasn't a property dispute anymore. This was war, and in war, you don't send letters, you send ordnance. I called George, my neighbor 3 doors down, a retired master machinist who had hated the Sterling since they forced him to take down his flagpole, and Sam, a tech wizard who ran a server farm in his basement. I showed them my blueprints, unrolling the sheets of vellum on my kitchen table, the graphite sketches detailing a counterweight system, a throwing arm, a payload basket. "Is that?" George asked, his eyes widening, a grin slowly spreading across his face. "A trebuchet," I said, my voice steady. "A Class B traction trebuchet, to be precise. Optimized for a short-range, high-impact delivery of a 20-pound payload." "Is it legal?" Sam asked, already typing on his laptop. "It's kinetic art," I replied. "The HOA guidelines allow for cultural sculptures under 15 feet. It's a historical homage to medieval engineering. And under the castle doctrine, if a vehicle is trespassing and threatening my life or property, I am allowed to deploy defensive measures." We built it in the garage over 4 nights, a beautiful monster of oak beams and steel-reinforced pivots, utilizing a garage door spring system to assist the gravity drop counterweight, calculating the trajectory with NASA-level precision. I didn't want to hurt her. Well, I did, but I didn't want to go to jail, so the targeting had to be perfect. It had to hit the engine block or the passenger side, avoiding the driver's seat by a margin of error of 6 inches. We got the intel from Martha, the town gossip who knew everything, that Karen was hosting a development tour on Friday afternoon, bringing 3 high-profile investors to show them the future commercial site that was currently my front lawn. She needed to impress them. She needed to show dominance. She needed to cut that corner to save time and prove she owned this town. Friday came. The air was still. The trebuchet was wheeled out, disguised under a tarp that looked like a modern art installation, positioned perfectly behind the newly repaired and fortified stone wall. I sat on the porch, a cup of tea in my hand, the laser rangefinder hidden in a flower pot, waiting for the queen bee to make her final mistake. The afternoon sun in Aspen Ridge has a way of making everything look high definition, sharp edges and deep shadows, and at 4:47 p.m., the stage was set for the final act of my career as an engineer. I could hear them before I saw them, a convoy of luxury vehicles, the lead car unmistakable, that white Range Rover, gleaming like a polished tooth, aggressive and entitled. Karen Sterling was leading her ducks to the slaughter, showing off the neighborhood she treated as her personal game reserve. And as they approached the corner, I saw the turn signal flash, not to go around the cul-de-sac like a lawful citizen, but to cut left, directly across the scar of earth where my wife's garden used to be. She was going fast, faster than usual, maybe 40 miles per hour, trying to give the investors a thrill, trying to show efficiency. I stood up, my heart rate steady at 60 beats per minute, the calm of the launch sequence taking over. Target acquisition, I whispered to myself. I pulled the tarp. The trebuchet stood revealed, a skeleton of dark wood and tension, beautiful and terrifying. George was by the release mechanism, hidden behind the hedge. Sam was filming from his drone hovering at 400 feet. The Range Rover's tires hit the grass. "Now," I said into the radio. George pulled the pin. "Physics is impartial. It doesn't care about your bank account or your husband's lawyers or your HOA title. Gravity is a law that cannot be repealed." The 2-ton counterweight dropped. The throwing arm whipped up with a sound like a giant cracking a whip, a whoosh thud that vibrated in your chest. The sling released at the apex of the arc, and the projectile, a 20-pound sphere of solid granite, one of the very rocks she had crushed weeks ago, now reformed and weaponized, flew through the air. Time seemed to dilate. I watched the stone arc against the blue Colorado sky, a dark comet of retribution. Karen must have seen it at the last second, because the Range Rover swerved slightly, but math is math. The impact was glorious. The granite boulder slammed into the hood of the Range Rover with the force of a meteorite, a kinetic transfer of energy that crumpled the reinforced steel like wet cardboard. The engine block shattered. Radiator fluid exploded in a green mist. The windshield spiderwebbed instantly, turning opaque. The momentum of the shot arrested the vehicle's forward motion so violently that the rear wheels lifted off the ground, the SUV shuddering as it died right there in the middle of the mud track she had carved. Silence returned to the street for one heartbeat, and then chaos. Steam hissed from the wreckage. The investors in the cars behind slammed on their brakes, witnessing the destruction of their deal. Karen stumbled out of the driver's side, screaming, her makeup ruined, pointing a shaking finger at me. "You lunatic. You tried to kill me. I'm calling the police. I'm suing you for everything." I didn't yell back. I just pointed to the sign I had posted that morning, large, red, and reflective. Warning: automated defensive measures active. Trespassers assume all liability. When Deputy Miller arrived, he was trying to hide a smile. The fire department came, inspecting the wreckage. Karen was shrieking about attempted murder, but I handed Miller the binder, the legal opinion on the Castle Doctrine, the proof of the illegal HOA amendments, the 47 documented instances of trespassing, the video of her bulldozing the garden, and the specifications of the kinetic sculpture. "It appears," Deputy Miller said, looking at Karen, "that you were trespassing on private property despite repeated warnings, causing an activation of a defensive device. And since the projectile didn't target the cabin, but the engine, I'd say this is a civil matter." The fallout was nuclear. The investors, seeing the lunacy of the situation and the legal quagmire, pulled out immediately. Sterling Heritage Group lost the contract. The viral video Sam uploaded, titled "Karen vs. Catapult," hit 3 million views in 24 hours. The scrutiny forced an audit of the HOA, exposing years of embezzlement by Richard Sterling, leading to his disbarment and the dissolution of the board. Karen's insurance company denied her claim because she was committing a crime, trespassing, during the incident. But the real victory wasn't the money or the fame. It was the following spring. I sat on the repaired bench, the crack filled with gold resin in the Japanese kintsugi style, making the break a part of the beauty. The Yorkshire roses were replanted, blooming white and fierce. The trebuchet still stands in the corner, a silent sentinel, a warning to anyone who thinks they can trample over a man's memories. I look at the garden, and I ask myself, was it extreme? Maybe. But in a world where the strong crush the weak without a second thought, is it wrong to turn the laws of physics into the laws of justice? Does the system protect us? Or do we have to build our own siege engines to defend what we love? I sip my coffee. The hummingbirds are back, and nobody cuts across my lawn anymore.